Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about negative reps or eccentric reps because this is a topic that comes up a lot with my clients. I have clients who ask me about this all the time, and it would actually be nice if I just have all of this consolidated into one video so that people understand what the research is on this, what we show in the lab, and understanding what's going on. All right, so you always see in the bodybuilding world, you will see tons of people will say things like, well, eccentric reps are the most important. They're the most important part for muscle growth. And that's just simply not true. And keeping in mind, people say, but lots of these bodybuilders did it and it worked. I'm like, well, no, lots of these bodybuilders lifted weights and trained hard and it worked. Okay. Because tons of them who are winning don't even care about their eccentric reps. And for those who don't know what I mean, a negative rep or the eccentric rep is the lowering of the weight towards gravity, right? You're lifting and you're lowering. In some cases, some exercises we don't lower the weight, you just drop it. But for the most part, we have two phases. The positive or the concentric rep, which is lifting, and then you have the eccentric rep, which is the negative, also called a negative, and it's the lowering. And what you'll see is that a lot of them will come up and say, well, this has been done for decades. They'll see research on it and they'll interpret it and then they'll all start using it. And because they're all using it, it just becomes tradition, except when it isn't, because tons of them don't even do it. So it's kind of a funny conundrum. You'll see guys who say that, but then you watch them train and they don't control their negatives. So it's quite comical. But that being said, the thing is, the research shows that it's an important part of hypertrophy, but it's not essential. In other words, on a rep for rep basis, it matters a lot. In terms of total work, it may not matter as much. In other words, if you just do more concentric work, it seems to roughly balance out. You might, in theory, lose a little bit of potential growth. So an exercise where if you were to just drop the weight, like a row, you could just drop it each time. But if you were to do enough work, it would probably bridge the gap. But let's get over and let's look at what the research shows on it. Because people will say, well, research shows negatives are important, an important part of the growth stimulus. And there is truth to that. What they show is that a negative just means any control. In other words, the studies and I've said this for years, by the way, the entire time I've been on YouTube, because these studies are very, very well founded. There's tons of these studies have been done. Any eccentric between 1 and 4 seconds produces the best muscle growth, right? Anything faster or slower than that produces less. So when you see someone say something like, oh, literally do 5 second or a 6 second, they are literally contradicting the research. Okay, the research shows the best growth with the lowering is a 1 to 4 second. And there's no difference between them. In other words, if you do it in 1 second, it's not inferior to 3 or 4. They all seem to be about the same. If you have less than a second, the bar is dropping at like free fall speed usually, right? That seems to cause a slightly less stimulus. And if you draw it out really slow, it actually creates really bad set quality because you're creating so much fatigue with so little work being done that the end result seems to be less muscle fiber recruitment. You just get fatigued without as good of a growth stimulus. Okay, so that is what we see there in the data. Okay, it's what we see in the data. All right. Furthermore, when the eccentrics start getting really slow, a lot of the data suggests that the hypertrophy becomes biased. People say, what do you mean? Faster versus slower twitch muscle fibers. In other words, eccentric reps in general tend to bias the hypertrophy that you gain towards the slower twitch muscle fibers, the endurance muscle fibers. Okay. Faster concentrics can potentially bias it towards the faster twitch. But we know that the really slow lifting biases it towards the slower twitch. And size is still size, but the thing to remember there, you don't necessarily have to focus on the slow twitch fibers to get more growth. And if anything, some of the evidence, at least anecdotally over the years, has suggested that a focus on faster twitch may have more growth potential anyways. And the slow twitch are still going to grow as a result of anything you do from the faster twitch. All right, but what we see is a bias towards that. Well, that's maybe okay because it all balances in the end if you're trying to bodybuild, but most of my clients are trying to get strong. Okay, a lot of my clients are power lifters, fighters, so on and so forth. They need power, they need strength. Okay, so essentially that hypertrophy is biasing towards, reduced performance. It's biasing you towards just basically being good at doing more reps or slow reps. I'm not going to get as much benefit from that in any sport of any type with a strength or a speed component, which is almost every sport on earth. All right, so that's part of your issue there. The other thing to look at when you look at the studies that have shown the really good hypertrophy from negatives, it's with weights heavier than you can lift. In other words, they have had machines, and that's what you see. When you have machines do the lifting and then they let you lower it, or you have spotters do it and you only take the eccentric reps, but with weights that you're not strong enough to lift. So it might be an eccentric rep, like let's say your bench press max is 200 pounds. They might put 220 on the bar and lower it 5 or 6 times, and you just have to lower it because we're stronger on eccentric reps. They're easier. That's the studies that showed the pretty good growth, okay, from eccentric only training. It has to be really heavy. Now, can we replicate that with some exercises? Well, you see that with some cheating type movements where you see a push press. Okay, that's a perfect example. Push press is an example of an exercise that might replicate that because you're cheating the weight up and then you're taking the eccentric rep. A cheat curl, so on and so forth. Now, here's the issue, though, with eccentric-based training. We do find is that it makes you a lot more sore. So, in other words, the slower your negatives are in general, the more sore that you get. But that soreness is not always correlated with more muscle growth. So do we see the problem here? And that's part of the reason people who do a lot of negatives sometimes feel like they're getting a better response too, is because they're getting more sore the next day. So if they're getting sore, it must be doing something. But what the data has found is that soreness doesn't always correlate with more muscle growth. So that's part of the issue. The other sort of eccentrics that we could be looking at is overspeed eccentrics, which is stuff like you see me do with the high-speed band press downs, or the speed benching, speed squats, speed pulls against bands. All right, band work with an overspeed eccentric can have a lot of benefits because of the micro traumas it's tearing, hypothetically. But we don't have a lot of research in the lab to back that. So it's just a hypothetical thing. But keeping in mind the same thing, a lot of our speed work with bands can leave us more sore, right, in some cases. But I would say that a lot of that stuff, the overspeed eccentrics, definitely lends itself towards tendon, right, towards tendon hypertrophy and building tendons up. But that's a different type of eccentric completely. But if people really wanted to focus on eccentrics, that's what they would be doing. They wouldn't be trying to do these really slow ones. Those have been shown to be inferior in the lab when they get real slow. Overspeed eccentrics against bands, cheat movements to where you control it on the way back down, that would make a little more sense if you even wanted to chase these. And I'm not saying that you have to. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.